Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with our weekly Q&A content. This is season 14, episode 4. You're watching this you're either watching or listening, or both, right? Ideally, you're actually listening only, or watching and listening, and not just watching. Because if you're just watching, you're not getting a lot out of it, right?
Right, I guess
you're not actually hearing this. If you're just watching and not listening,
ideally you're hearing something.
Yeah. So if you are listening and watching simultaneously, do you want to describe to the people what they'll be watching?
Okay, so we're still keeping up, even though it's a new season, we're still keeping up with a preview of who we expect to be the challenge character this Thursday. It is Mortal Kombat X Scorpion. And we're going to go into a lot more detail about this stuff. We're not going to talk a lot about it, but because this is the background action, I think it's worth making a few comments that strike me as I'm playing more with him in the past few days. So, like all the damage over time people, almost all damage over time people, their expected damage for a given special and their given attack stat is reduced because of the extra effect. And typically damage over time means you do half damage. There's a few exceptions. The notable one for me is Arkham Knight Catwoman, because she does only a little bit reduced instead of half. She does 3/4. But you can see here, he's doing half the damage that he really should for what his attack stat is. And what it really points out to me is how good the synergy of the different Quake Engine abilities are. So it's got the effects of increasing the damage over time by making it start again. But the fact that it boosts damage special and damage over time special by 50% against not all enemies, but enemies with less than 1 bar of power, means that sometimes you get a chance to make up for a little bit of that deficiency in the damage that you do.
It's true.
Which is kind of neat. One other thing I want to point out in the footage that you're going to see is that at least at 8 minutes and about 8.5 minute time and the 16-minute timestamps, you'll see this team fighting against a Blackest Night Flash team, which you would think, okay, that's going to be tough.
Yeah.
Scorpion's got a decent amount of damage over time. The Blackest Night Flash team is going to reverse that damage into health and give a power boost. We're going to have some real trouble if we're going to rely on Scorpion. So there's a couple of things. One is because Rebirth Raven is so good, if you time it properly, you will steal their health, or steal their, power back that you're letting them. So they're just generating more power for us.
Yeah.
Or what you can do is use Scorpion as a super specialist instead of a special specialist, and then you avoid that trouble. Fights take a little bit longer, but you can see we don't sort of bail out of those fights because we think we can still take them, and we do.
Mm-hmm. So there we go. Getting into our first question of the week. This one comes from High Ruler 3, and they say, why do you guys say Canadian dollars is the only currency that matters?
And I responded originally saying, because we like stating the obvious.
Yeah.
But that's sort of one of those goofy non-answer answers.
Mm-hmm. It's a little sarcastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you're the one who says it mostly, and you're the person who at least started saying it. So do you want to...
All right, so the first thing is that it's true that the prices that we quote are in Canadian dollars, and
because we're in Canada.
There's a couple different levels of the joke. I mean, it's less funny if you have to explain it, but it is a joke about how insular and how much, when you don't have sort of a global perspective, the things that you think are important are really the only things that you know. Like if you don't know a lot about other people, then it doesn't seem like other things matter a lot.
There's a tweet that I really, really like that was, I'm going to say it as close as I can, but it's guy who has only seen The Boss Baby watching a second movie. I'm getting real Boss Baby vibes from this one. Right?
That's good.
Where the joke is, it's like, yeah, when you have exactly one thing as your frame of reference, everything else has to tie back to that one thing, right?
Yeah.
So that first level of the joke is we're here.
We're
It's
Canadian.
what matters to us.
Sure.
Right? And so then, obviously, that's the thing that matters to everybody.
Right.
Yeah. So that's level 1.
Yeah, and that's clearly a flawed way of thinking. I mean, maybe it's not so obvious to people who haven't watched this for a long time. I feel like the positions that we take when it comes to just pretty much anything, I try to be as progressive as I can. I try to be as open-minded as I can. And that codes in North America, at least, as being liberal.
Or at least voting liberal or progressive.
Or democratic, right?
Yeah.
If you were in the States, but we're not, because, we're Canadian.
Yeah.
And Canadian politics matter. But the problem is, American politics matter because as Canadians, the United States is one of our biggest trading partners, and there's an outsized influence that they have when they change their trade policy in a way that can potentially hurt Canadian markets and the Canadian economy.
Yeah. So I think the tone of it had changed slightly with the trade stuff, where you got more excited to talk about it being the only currency that matters as a sort of, it's still joking, obviously.
Right, but there's a bit of defiance behind it too. In my mind,
there's a bit of like saying, oh, you were like, well, compared to the US, right? And it's one of those things, I think it's a hard balance to strike, right? Because I think we've talked about this before, but the idea that Canada broadly is, I think, does a lot of things in a way that I prefer relative to the US, right? When you talk about healthcare, when you talk about, firearms and gun control, when you talk about sort of the fact that, Poilievre didn't win here, right? And you talk about like the right-wing political machine in the States versus Canada and the success of the right-wing political machine, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of things that I think you can be thankful for in comparison about being in North America, but being in Canada relative to the States. But I also think that you want to be careful about not comparing yourself favorably in a way that lets you ignore all the stuff that you're doing that is not good or not okay as a country, and all of the progress that you can and should make. It's, we're better than them does not mean we are good enough yet, right?
Right. Speaking of the difference between Canadian and American politics, though, so when you said Poilievre didn't win, what is happening, what was predicted and what was promised and what is happening is that there's going to be a by-election in a riding in, I think, Alberta.
I believe so,
that was won handily by the original candidate, something ridiculously high, like an 80-something% win, like the percentage of the votes. And what I can hope is, I mean, realistically, I'm an optimist, I think, in some ways, by temperament, but I think I'm at least a realist. I think given how conservative leaning, Reform Party leaning, Alliance leaning that riding is, it's too much to hope that somebody would be able to beat Poilievre, even though he's basically a demonstration of all the worst things he complains about.
Yeah.
He's not elected. He's living in government-funded housing and for free, and he doesn't actually have a job. So, I mean, he might be the leader, but I think he doesn't. Does he get paid? He's not an elected official, so he doesn't get paid like a member of parliament.
If you're the official opposition leader, I think there is a salary. But anyways, yeah. Okay.
So, realistically, it would be too much to hope that he would lose the election, the by-election. Although, I'll tell you what, I mean, it felt like a bit of a pipe dream to hope he would lose the election that he actually did lose in the Ottawa riding. Mm-hmm. But I hope that he wins a much lower percentage than the guy who gave up his seat. Mm-hmm. That would be very satisfying, because then that would be at least a very public, personal repudiation of the kind of, I won't even say politics. It's the attitude. I think you can be conservative without being so smarmy and intentionally provocative and aggressive and offensive.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
So those are sort of the two levels of the joke. Is there a third one, or is that where we're operating? I can't think of anything else off the top of my head why we're saying that specifically.
Yeah, I you know what? It is sort of that in your face. I mean, maybe if somebody saw it, didn't know us, it's also a joke. It's an in-joke, really, because part of it relies on people knowing us.
Yeah.
Because if you don't know us, it could sound potentially
obnoxious.
It could sound obnoxious.
Yeah.
I mean, it is intentionally a little bit obnoxious. That's why it's kind of funny, right?
Yeah.
If it weren't like that, it would be a different kind of joke.
Well, I think, that's probably, it's the way that I start by giving the real explanation, and then you jump in with something that is obviously wrong, like it is providing additional information, right?
Right.
Where I think if we were just saying, because it's the only currency that matters, then it would be a little different, where I'm saying the correct thing, which is that, like, how much harder would it be? It would be technically more instructive to our audience if the prices were in US, because more of our audiences in the US than not.
I think YouTube told me that at one point. Yeah.
Yeah. But it would also be a lot more work for us, right? So we're in Canada.
Well, we have
so that's the
access
number
to
that we get. So we give people the numbers that we have.
Although I think if I was really motivated, I could use a VPN and log in under a different location.
Maybe, but would your Google account not still be in Canadian dollars?
Yeah, that's probably
You might need to use a different Google account and stuff. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Not worth it. Because, I mean, we know what it costs in the only currency that matters, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
So there we go. The next question comes from Annie Flick, or this is not really a question, this is just a comment. This comes from Annie Flick 480, and they say, the game is dying.
Yeah, and that was from our last recap.
Yeah.
Just a few days ago.
Man, I think the thing with games, there's a very popular sort of thing. Is this game dying? Is this game dead? Is this game going to be replaced by something else? And I think by a lot of metrics, the game is kind of already dead, right?
Sure.
In every way except for your ability to continue playing it, right? The game is dead.
And that's not insignificant. There are games where when they stop supporting it, that you literally can't play it anymore, even if you have it downloaded. So
there's actually something right now. There's a meaningful sort of news piece. There's something called Stop Killing Games, which is an initiative basically that is trying to, in the EU, legislate it so that game companies are not able to leave their games as unplayable when they are abandoned later.
Right.
And so basically the idea is that, for example, if they host servers, right? When the servers go down, they should open source the ability to host servers privately. So individuals can continue to host the servers, right? Not to continue to bear costs, right? But to make it possible for other people to play it. If there's a single player game that for whatever reason has online content that requires always online, like for example, Injustice would have a limited playability if you lost server connection, right?
But you could still play it. There's an offline component that's not insignificant.
Yeah, so the idea is that within reason, for what is reasonable, if people are paying for the game, right? Yeah. Paying, and really what it is most of the time now is you're paying for a license of it, right? But the idea is to give the value of the license more value, and you are forcing people to, within reason, legislate it so that you can't just leave games as totally unplayable. You can't have them become lost media or phase out of existence. And you should, at the very least, give people the tools to continue to make their own things playable. It's kind of like right to repair stuff, but for video games, almost.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so
it's not really repair so much as just giving
right
people access to,
So I believe that needs 1 million signatures from EU citizens, and then it'll be brought before the EU Parliament. And the EU is often where people start when they want legislation to be spread more broadly across gaming, because it's a big enough market and it's a large enough block that in most cases it makes more sense to have the entire world on the same system. Right. So that's interesting. And there's also been some controversy with that, but I guess we won't get into all of that because I haven't really looked at it too much.
All right, how sad is it that the only other mobile game that I played with any kind of significant dedication, I can't remember its name.
Renegade Midnight Star?
Renegade. The star was in my mind. Renegade Midnight Star was totally out.
Yeah.
I loved that game. And even though it wasn't so obvious that it required any kind of server, because face it, we're never playing against another real person.
Yeah. It's just like leaderboards, basically.
Yeah. And
leaderboards and rotating content.
So every day I would play the daily challenges, and I loved that game. I had spreadsheets on all the different equipment and the things that I had that I could be using and how to make the most of it so that my stats were as good as possible for the way I played.
Yeah.
And then when they stopped the servers, the game was just unplayable, wouldn't load.
Yeah. It is too bad. I think it always is a little bit sad when stuff gets lost, right? There's the sort of, you move on naturally, but there's something sort of comforting about knowing it's there to go back to, right? Yeah. Where you can revisit it later for a little bit of nostalgia, or you can get some continued joy out of it. But when it just dies and then it just blinks out, it's a little unfortunate. There's some stuff that I think is ephemeral sort of intrinsically, where there wouldn't be a lot of value to it being like a permanent thing. Like there was Baseball, if you heard about that at all when it was happening. It was this weird baseball simulator thing that I didn't much participate in, but it was essentially like a game where you were like, I believe, betting like fake currency on these simulated baseball teams, and it was just this communal experience where you're betting, you had your favorite team, you were doing all this stuff, and then they had all these weird and wacky things happening where the rules would change and
like
teams would die, they would get like resurrected, there would be like, you know, a bunch of stuff. So it was essentially this big, weird, sort of partially community driven like story, right? That was being told through the lens and through the mechanical way that you interface with it was like having a team that you were supporting and betting on and whatever. And so like that was, I think, ephemeral by nature, right? And so there's a lot of experiences like that, but there's a lot of experiences that it would be really nice if you could continue to have them. And, you know, for a game like Renegade Midnight Star, it would be nice if, for example, if it was, they could do it within reason. There was a route where they said, here, this is a way to still make it playable, right? We're abandoning this project, but, you know, the community loves it and we put a lot of time and effort and love into it. And I think that's the important thing too, is I think, you know, for developers, I'm sure having a sort of plan in mind, like a sunset plan, right, of what to do when the game fails. Because for teams, right, I'm sure there's a lot of developers that I don't think you can make video games and spend so long on a thing without caring about it to at least some extent, or at least you hope they do, right? You hope there's some passion and care and love for the thing that they're making. And so it would be nice for them to have sort of something in their portfolio, but also something where they can keep that sort of connection to the thing that they made and have it still be out in the world.
I still have a Renegade Midnight Star t-shirt.
Yeah. And
it's worn out in one spot, so I have to stop wearing it, and I've saved it and put it away as a little memento.
Yeah, because you won it from like a competition.
By writing poetry about the about the game, yes.
I forgot about the specifics of it. That's really funny.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we never got around to making a video. I think I had footage, and I don't know, I can't remember which folder I stored it in. I've got footage from one of the daily challenges on that.
Yeah. Because you were winning the daily challenges pretty consistently. There was like one other guy who you were often competing with who was at like your level.
I did pretty good. I think once you sort of figure out what your strategy for playing is, and you've played long enough to collect the right kind of equipment, then you get a real chance to customize in the way that you like to play to give you the best chance at really kicking everybody's butt.
For all of your talking about the game, I remember watching you play it one time, and the frame rate was so horrific. Like, I was watching you play it, and I was like, I feel like I would be physically, like, annoyed. Like, I feel like I'd be annoyed. I feel like there would be, like, tension in my body from playing a game running this poorly. Because you, I think it was that it started out smoother, and then the more stuff going on and the more things on the screen. So it was like really, but you also probably had a bit of an advantage because you were essentially playing in slow-mo. Like I remember you being like, I know if I like throw a grenade right at the start of this and then I have to like jump over here, that you're kind of like moving blind almost.
Part of it was that maybe my brain was kind of filling in the blanks. Like I was assuming certain things were happening at different times. And maybe it wasn't, it looked like slow motion, but it was like there were jumps in the like gaps, right? It was almost stuttering a little bit.
Yeah.
But it was, man, I missed that game. There's just something, you know what it shared with Injustice was the idea of planning ahead of time. Like part of it is to play in the fight. Like we just saw the second Blackest Night Flash team fight. And part of it is adapting to it when you see it. But part of it is both preparing your loadout and also preparing your mind how you're going to approach certain things before you do it, so that you have the best chance of being successful.
We've talked, I think, before about how mobile games as a format don't have nearly as much space for complexity of control input. And so the sort of types of experiences that are often good for mobile are either ones that have been designed by the ground up to be mechanically satisfying with a really simple, crude input system. So for example, that is like, I think Injustice is an example of that, but I think like Downwell is a really good example of that, where there's only 3 buttons. It's left, right, and then an action button, and it plays with that, and it is able to be really sort of tightly paced and action oriented and play really smoothly because it only really asks you to have 3 really coarse inputs to get the most of the game, and that is playable on mobile. And that games, when you port them just to mobile and don't make any sort of compromises for how you're going to be inputting stuff, is often not very good. The second one is games that are designed for mobile sort of from the ground up and take advantage of things that mobile is like uniquely good at, right? In terms of like the touch screen.
Or what's the thing in the when you change directions that
the orientation, like portrait versus landscape.
There's something in it that there's
like a gyroscope?
Yeah, like a gyroscope.
I feel like gyroscope stuff often is not that great though.
But
there's potential there.
Is it the execution? I mean, to me, the idea of it should be great because that's something that you can really do that a computer doesn't.
Gyroscope is fun and interesting. The issues that you get with it is that, there's not a lot that you can do with gyroscope that I think isn't at least a little bit finicky. It's a really hard thing to do any sort of fine input with, and there's a lot of stuff like if you're in like a car or train or moving vehicle, right?
Oh yeah, right.
There's a lot of situations in which it sort of becomes not that usable, and I think the third way that games work really well for mobile is if it's a strategy and planning experience more so than an action and response time experience. And so I think Injustice does a good job of blending those things where there is a lot of strategy and planning, but the games that I'm thinking about are games like Into the Breach, games like Slay the Spire, games like Balatro, right? Where the speed can happen at almost any time. There's a game called Slice and Dice that's really good. That's like this dice-based game that, well, I say really good. It's at least, fun. It's interesting and compelling. With a game like Slay the Spire, right? You can take as long as you want for it. It doesn't matter, right? Your turn can be any length. And so if you, tap on the wrong card or whatever, it just needs to be not finicky enough that it's annoying. And then it is all strategy and planning, right? And those games work really well on mobile because you can take your time with them because the input system being crude is only a barrier in terms of how hard it makes it to interact with the game. It doesn't limit sort of your skill ceiling in any meaningful way.
Right.
It limits the amount of time it takes to do the same thing, not at all the action that you could take. So I think it's and then a lot of mobile games just aren't very good, right? I think the other thing is that a lot of otherwise good games can be ruined by their monetization, right? Because I think PC games, and I mean the monetization of PC games has actually gotten a lot worse too, in terms of microtransactions and like live service games where they're constantly asking you for little bits of money. But I think for much longer, and there's a much lower standard for how well you need to treat the consumer as a mobile game developer. A lot of the stuff is kind of just shoveling ads in your face and shoveling like purchase requests in your face. But when you find a good one, it's really nice.
Sure.
It's a special thing.
And sometimes I feel like those newer consoles that are handheld and they're portable are trying to take sort of muscle in on some of the advantages that real mobile games have, because one of the things is you're carrying your phone everywhere with you pretty much.
Yeah.
So the kind of games that are able to sort of fit into those interstitial moments when, I don't know, what you're sitting on the toilet, you know what I mean? Like for a few minutes here, a few minutes there, that it just makes it easy to play. And if a game developer can take advantage of that, it makes it a much more, not immersive, but just...
It's a flexible thing.
I feel like it has the potential to pull you in so much more because there's a chance that you can...
You can steal 5 minutes here and there.
Yeah,
It doesn't need to be only when you can sit down. There's some experiences that you want to sit down, not even just for an hour, but you want it like at least like an hour and a half, 2 hours, or it almost doesn't become worth starting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that's how I feel with my Steam Deck. There's a lot of times that I can just do, and there's a lot of games that I would not play on my PC because it's just hard to find the time. But on your Steam Deck, it totally is it's a different math. Yeah. So I absolutely agree. Do you want to do one more?
Yeah, I think this actually sort of dovetails nicely into the next question.
Yeah. So Gadafwar 5520.
Is it God of War?
Yeah, God of War. I was thinking potentially too. Says, crazy, bro. I remember watching you like 10 years ago or something. What keeps you so active in the game?
We were playing 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's wild.
And this is exactly what keeps you in the game. The fact that it is... All right, so, I mean, let's get the obvious out of the way.
Making content,
right?
That's what keeps us in the game.
That's the biggest part. But what keeps us able to make content about this game is because it is so easy to take with you, because it is so easy to play. I've got lunch, I've got a few minutes, I can do a ladder. When I have longer moments, there's something about it when you... I don't know if I've used this analogy before. It's like when people drink.
Yeah.
And they drink a specific drink to the point where they can taste the little differences. Like, I've met people online who love scotch.
Yeah, coffee, wine, scotch,
whatever
all that stuff.
And they all taste the same to me.
Most things that are agricultural products will have enough variance, right? Because they will be literally different from year to year, right? There will be really subtle variations. If it's an agricultural product, especially if it's a like technique processed agricultural product, right? Because you often preserve a lot of and then also subtly change a lot of its characteristics.
And another level to that, though, too, would be geographical differences. Because of when it's agricultural, that's an excellent point.
Yeah.
How much of the way something tastes is a result of what is pulled from the ground.
Yeah. So when I say agricultural product, I mean something that is strongly based off of a crop, right? So like coffee is coffee bean, right? And it often is like single or really low ingredient agricultural products are especially, you can really develop a taste for them.
Right, because when you start adding stuff,
the more stuff there is, you
can make it taste like different
even
things.
If you think about like you have like wine, right? Wine is often just one grape from one region that is processed in one way in, one barrel, right? And the more other stuff you have, right, you can tell a lot more when there's only that one thing, right? Where you can say this is the same grape from the same time, but the barrel is different, or this is the same grape from a different year, right? The more ingredients you have, the more little differences you can't ascribe to just one thing, right? It's sort of like the scientific method where when you've isolated the variables, right? If there's only 5 different things that have happened to it between it being a seed or like being a plant, right? And it being in your mouth, right? You can understand what is happening at each of those steps and taste or notice those differences more easily.
And again, that assumes that the person who's experiencing it has enough experience with it so that they can notice the difference.
And that's also if you're not just filling in the information that you want to, if you've you've made up a pleasant story. And that's the other thing too, is that like, sometimes you can just be wrong, but in a way that a lot of people agree on.
Right. And this is the one point that I think people miss sometimes when they talk about I think it's Malcolm Gladwell that started talking about the 10,000 hours of experience to develop expertise.
Be an expert.
It's more than just the time, because there's lots of people putting a lot of time and getting nothing out of it. I think part of it requires that you be mindful of what you're doing so that you open yourself up enough to experience that you're in the moment and you're thinking about what's happening so that you can notice the kind of subtleties that inform your expertise.
Consciously upskilling yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. So you were talking about developing taste, and you saying you've done this for Injustice.
So I feel like this is what's happening with Injustice, where, and I don't even feel like I've scratched the surface, or I've scratched more than the surface, because I know that there's certain characters and certain gears that I'm biased against because of my first impression. And there were times when we did certain themes for, say, a Q&A season where I would force myself to do something outside my regular comfort zone, and I would discover things that were different.
Yeah.
And I can see that sometimes. I mean, every once in a while, they'll go on the Injustice Mobile subreddit and look at the strategy that some people use. And not everybody's strategy, right? The people who are reasonably successful have been playing for a while, and they have a slightly different approach. And is absolutely as or more successful than some of the things we've tried. And I feel like I could be doing more if I actually had more time. But if I had more time, I think there's just so many other things that, I mean, I've got literally hundreds of books. I just picked up a couple long boxes of old comics from the 80s and maybe even 90s, but definitely
Nice.
like late 80s, mid to late 80s. And I'm dying to go through them. I have to rebag all of them and maybe even read some of them, but there's some real gems in there.
Very cool.
And it's not meant to be anything more than just, that's an example of just today. I've just taken on more activities that I don't have time to do. So as much as, I mean, the interesting thing is that the more I'm playing Justice, like there's almost a threshold. At one point I was thinking I'm done.
Yeah.
And then once you get past that, there's a threshold when you're past where it feels like I could do more of this.
There's a comfort in familiarity, and you depending on how you're putting your time and energy into it, there's more you can get out of it.
Yeah.
I think definitely making content has helped us get a lot more out of it than we would otherwise.
Definitely getting past the humps, right? Any kind of it makes it any kind of friction that there is involved with playing it a little bit less, or just that I'm able to push past it a little bit that I might not otherwise have. And when I have, there's been enough, it's given enough back to me that I feel motivated to play more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So I think that's a good place to end off for the week. To finish up, we'd like to give a huge thank you to our lovely patrons on Patreon. That is Michael Devries, Irvin, Ruiz, Hoshi127, Nora Klimek, and Miguel, who are supporting us on the credited level. Thank you so much for your support. Thanks so much, all of you, for watching. We'll see you next time.
Komoda.